next from CBS Sports.
High drive, center field, hit the wall, grand slam. This is magnificent.
Got a fantasy question? Email fantasybaseball@cbsi.com. Get ready to win your league.
Where fantasy becomes reality.
Now here's Frank, Scott, Chris, and Adam.
Who should you avoid in your fantasy baseball drafts? Bust 3.0 is coming up right now. Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today. Frank Sample joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. We have all the busts coming up later on as well. We got some deeper sleepers for those who play in AL and NL only leagues. Got some utility only stuff that I was researching into today. When are some of these players going to gain eligibility in the outfield? If they are going to gain that eligibility, we'll talk about it all. Chris, you have a new song that you're working on. I don't know if we were supposed to reveal it or not, but
No, I want to record it at some point. So I don't want to. I posted a little teaser on Twitter.com for all my Harvey Danger heads. So
who's that?
Keep an ear out for it. That was a late '90s alternative rock band who sang the hit song "Flagpole Sitta" from the Idle Hands soundtrack, I think is where that song is from.
I don't know much about the artist, but I do know the song. So
I think that's their only hit.
Oh,
so,
for sure. That's got to be a one-hit wonder. What's going on, Scott? How's life?
It's fine. It's good. Doing good.
Looking suave. Got the polo, slick back hair.
Yeah. Trying to class it up around here with the polo.
Yeah, Chris and I just out here looking like schlubs.
Yeah.
No big deal. Let's Scott, you recently wrote about your bust 3.0. So let's talk about it. Who is your most likely to bust of the new additions that you added to that list?
Well, when you put it that way, Frank, I think I would have to say Patrick Corbin, who I just basically want nothing to do with anymore. The velocity this spring has been what it was basically all of last season. And he was a disaster last season. There was a dip in velocity. He ended up having the highest whip among qualifying pitchers. It was just a really awful season for Patrick Corbin. So, it was obviously a weird season, unusual buildup, all of that. I think it was fair to give him a pass heading into spring training, but I really needed to see more than I have to have any motivation to take him. I will point out, just to argue against myself, that he was throwing about 88 last spring and then got up to 90 during the regular season. So if you play that out the same way, he goes from 90 to 92, then he is right back to where he was in 2019 and previously. So maybe it'll be fine. But I don't like hearing about how he's working to add a changeup, to emphasize his changeup again. When
Scott
going away from that,
Scott hates when guys are working hard.
and when going away from that and really leaning on the slider is what allowed him to break through in the first place. I think he's reaching. I think he's reaching because he knows he doesn't have it anymore.
Ooh, poor Patrick Corbin. For years, I feel like you were in on him before, Scott. He was fine. He was a great pitcher in the past couple of seasons. Again, that is Patrick Corbin, the 38th starting pitcher off the board, according to Fantasy Pros. Scott has him all the way down as his SP 49. So if you use those rankings, chances are you're not going to wind up with Patrick Corbin. Chris, I know that, wow, you just zoomed yourself in there.
Yeah, I was too zoomed out. I didn't like the look. So just want to get a little closer to you guys.
Chris, I know that you also have Patrick Corbin as a bust. Is there anything other than everything Scott said that you would like to emphasize on Patrick Corbin?
Yeah, it's just kind of if the end were coming, this is what it would look like, I think. I will say, like, if he was falling, that would be one thing, but I think he went like inside the top 50 in a head-to-head points draft we did today. And so, like, if I could get him in the 130 range, I would be okay taking that risk. But because he was in his breakout 2018 season, I remember he was throwing like 92 miles an hour in April, and then his velocity really crashed, and he was averaging like 89 in May and June, and he never really got back to where he was before then. It didn't really matter. He was still excellent. However, that was the first year that he went, kind of that Lance McCullers route where he was just throwing his slider like 40% of the time. And, now that the story's out on him, maybe he doesn't have another adjustment left to make. I know he's working on the changeup. Maybe that can be the adjustment. I know in the last few years he had toyed with a curveball at various times. So, we'll see. But yeah, it's very hard to get excited about him at this point.
Chris, let's stick with you here. Player most likely to bust that you are adding to your bust 3.0 is blank.
Oh, adding to my bust 3.0. Okay, that's a different question because James Karinchak.
Karinchak.
It does not sound like he's the closer for the Indians. This is not about James Karinchak not being a good pitcher, although I think, there are some flaws in his game. He's going to give up a lot of walks. He's going to give up a decent amount of home runs relative to how hard he is to square up, just because he is he's not a fly ball pitcher in the way we normally use that term. He's a fly ball pitcher in that he almost never gives up anything but fly balls. He had a 23% ground ball rate last season. So I can just see a scenario where they don't quite trust him in the ninth inning when they've got Nick Whitgren, who actually sounds like he might be the closer. There have been a lot of signs coming out that Nick Whitgren actually might be the favor for that job, but they've also got Emmanuel Clase, who could be the closer. And there's a chance that Karinchak's ratios aren't quite as good as we want them to be. I think the strikeouts will be, incredible. I think he's going to be a 15, 16, 17 K per 9 guy, but I just think there is a little room for him to be a little bit disappointing, and especially I think there's a lot of room for him not to be the closer. At this point, I'd say it's more likely not that he's not the closer.
James Karinchak currently has an ADP of 98.4. He's being drafted inside the top 100 picks as a top 10 relief pitcher in fantasy baseball. Scott, would you like to retort? I know that
I just wonder what he saw that made him. Was there something concrete you saw, or you just kind of?
No, it's just been
a lot of vibe.
It's been a lot of like reporters saying, I think Nick Whitgren could be the closer, and I feel like that's happening more and more.
That's pretty concrete. I hadn't seen anything like that.
Yeah,
there's
been no like comments from the coaching staff yet.
I saw this tweet on Tuesday from Tom Withers from the Associated Press, but he also covers some Cleveland sports teams. And he said, Terry Francona with high praise for Nick Whitgren, who has been reliable and consistent from day one. He could be a closing option to open the year. So that's about.
So I found this quote from Francona. This was from today. It said, he's been nothing but a pro. He's been reliable. He's been accountable. He's a leader. He's been a huge part of our bullpen and will continue to be. I don't know. If you're inclined to believe Whitgren's the closer, I see how you could read that into it. He's been a huge part of our bullpen and will continue to be. I could also see you reading that as he will maintain the same role he's already had. So,
yeah, I think that's all true. But it's also worth saying he's the only one in this bullpen who's gotten save opportunities before.
Nick Whitgren?
He's gotten very few.
He has 4 career saves.
Which is, Karinchak has 0, right?
One. I think he got one last year.
He's got to have at least one, right?
Yeah, I think he got one last year.
He has one in his career.
He's the only one who's had a stretch where his teams used him that way. Obviously, we're dealing with tiny sample sizes across the board, but it's just a little bit of reading the tea leaves for me. And when you're talking about a top 100 pick, even when I do think non-closer relievers can have more value than ever, I'm talking about, Alex Reyes with one of your last 5 picks. I'm talking about, Devin Williams in the 160, 170 range. I don't see a good reason to draft James Karinchak in the top 100 when Nick Anderson and Devin Williams are going 60 picks later.
Yeah, I mean, just to play devil's advocate, I just think it's a high risk, high reward play, Chris, because you're like, if he's not the closer, you're right. I mean, he's still going to be really good, get you a lot of strikeouts, and should have awesome ratios. But the reason Scott mentioned him as a breakout back when we did our relief pitcher preview was that if he does wind up being the closer, I mean, he could have an Edwin Diaz type season from a few years ago, not having, 50 plus saves, but if he had 35 plus saves with a sub-2 ERA and, 120 strikeouts or something crazy like that, he's probably a top 3 reliever. So I get why people like the upside of Karinchak, but I'm closer with you. I do think there's more downside here.
Like all of the things you can say in his favor are also true of Nick Whitgren and potentially Devin Williams. I think he's less of a sure thing just because his track record is so much smaller.
Not to go on for 5 minutes about James Karinchak, but the article where I found that quote was from Paul Hoynes of Cleveland.com. I'm not sure what newspaper that is. The site's Cleveland.com. And he was kind of suggesting, he was interpreting it as Francona wants to go by committee at the start until the roles kind of sort themselves out. So we'll see.
And even that makes it a risky pick inside the top 100. Yeah. That is James Karinchak, who Chris will have in his Bust 3.0. More busts to come a little bit later on. Just want to promote a few things. If you are trying to stay up to date on all of your sports coverage, whether it's baseball, March Madness, everything that's going on with the NFL, you should be watching CBS Sports HQ. It is free. You can watch it at cbssports.com/live is the link for that. If you use a streaming device to watch television, a Roku, an Xbox, PlayStation, whatever it might be, you can download the CBS Sports app and you can watch HQ on there for free. And I wanted to remind everyone that this will be our final bonus mailbag of the preseason of spring training here, as we're just about a week away from opening day. So this Saturday, we will have a bonus mailbag. Continue to send in your emails. We will try to get to as many as we possibly can. fantasybaseball@cbsi.com. And you can drop some questions with an Apple Podcast review. We'll grab some from there as well. And send us your bold predictions. Send us some bold predictions via email. Again, Apple Podcast review, whatever it might be. We have the superstar, Adam Azer, coming on the podcast this Thursday night recording, which will come out on this Friday. We're going to ask Adam about some of his favorites, and we'll talk about some bold predictions there. So if you send those in, we'll talk about some of them here on the air. And just a few programming notes. If you like watching us live on YouTube, for the next 2 nights, we will be going live between 11 and 11:15 p.m. Eastern time because we have some drafts. Scott and I have a draft tomorrow, and Chris has a draft on Thursday. So again, the next 2 nights, we will be starting a little bit later on the YouTube side of things. Some news and notes. Fernando Tatis left Tuesday's game and has been initially diagnosed with left shoulder discomfort. He will be reevaluated on Wednesday. Scott, if you are drafting right now, you're in the middle of a draft, first round just started, are you worried at all about Fernando Tatis, or are you taking whatever discount you can get?
I am taking whatever discount I could get. Like, I was already inclined to slot him behind Acuna and Betts, and maybe not Soto, but certainly in a points league Soto. I think that makes that decision easier. But the latest I saw was that he's dealt with soreness in that shoulder off and on over the years, has a good idea of how to manage it. He said he probably would have kept playing if it was a regular season game. So it doesn't sound like a big deal. We'll know more tomorrow, though, it sounds like.
Yeah. And I feel like I don't have any data to back this up, but I feel like this happens right at the end of spring training every year. Some kind of superstar gets banged up, and just as a result is going to slip a little bit further in a draft than they should, or you're going to get them a little bit cheaper in a salary cap draft than they should go for, and they just wind up being perfectly fine. They're healthy by opening day, and just they go on to be awesome. So if you're drafting in the next couple of days before we have concrete information on Fernando Tatis, I'm willing to just say, all right, any discount I can get here, I would be willing to take that with Fernando Tatis. We have a Zach Gallen update. He has a hairline stress fracture in his right forearm. Manager Torey Lovullo said Gallen will continue playing catch during this first phase. Not sure what that means. And did not offer a timeline. Chris, I don't know if you're a doctor or not, but can you help me out here? Zach Gallen.
I know he's not a doctor.
I am not a doctor,
He might moonlight as one, at like 1 a.m. when we finish up every night.
but I kind of think this isn't bad news. It's certainly better than I thought it was. A fracture tends to heal more predictably than other types of injuries, and we're not talking about something that happened while he was pitching. It's not something that you can look at and say, well, the stress of him pitching caused this hairline fracture. It was just a ball fouled off his forearm, right? Is that what happened?
I know it happened while he was swinging. I don't know exactly what the scenario was.
And so that really tells me that it's going to take how long it takes to heal, and we don't know yet, but the fact that he's going to keep being able to throw is a good sign.
Wait, isn't a stress fracture caused by stress, or is that a misnomer?
I thought it was a hairline fracture he had. I thought that was what it was.
Do the terms get used interchangeably? Because I thought I saw stress fracture, which I interpreted to mean is repeated. A repeated action caused it.
This tweet that I got from Nick Piacoro, I believe it is, said it combined the two terms. It was a hairline stress fracture.
That's not helpful.
I've seen a few people. I mean, it's all speculation. We don't have a timetable at this point, but I've seen 3 to 4 weeks on the lower end, and I've seen some people say 6 to 8 weeks on Twitter. I mean, no one knows for sure. We're just guessing, but like
6 to 8 weeks is how long it takes for a fracture of a bone of typical density. A hand bone could be 4 to 6 weeks. A femur is going to be a lot longer than 6 to 8 weeks, but that's just kind of the general timeline for a broken bone. Yeah. But this being a small fracture and him still throwing through it, so presumably that means it's going to speed up the ramp up process. And what I interpret from that during this phase is as he recovers, he can do more than just play catch. So I'm just like, who do I want more, Gallen or Carrasco? Yesterday I would have said Gallen for sure. Now I think you still say Gallen, Chris?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think there's any reason to think Carrasco will be back sooner. We don't have a timeline for either of them, but I would guess they're going to be back around the same range. And we all had Gallen ahead of Carrasco before this. Carrasco's had
one
the hamstring. Yeah, it was a little more than that, but Carrasco had the elbow issue that we kind of forgotten about because of the hamstring issue. And both of those seem more likely to recur than a fracture in the forearm that was caused by swinging a bat. Obviously, that is just conjecture. I'm not a doctor, but this sounds like once that bone is healed, Gallen should be fine, and he should be back relatively quickly after that.
So
Whereas, I would think like my prior right now is probably Gallen is back around the start of May.
So, Scott, are you saying that you're going to drop Gallen? Because you have him at SP 32. Are you going to drop him down to that Carrasco range? You have Carrasco at SP 48.
Yeah, I would say so. Obviously subject to change as we know more. We just don't know much right now. So I'm I kind of said it when Carrasco got hurt, like my default view, especially for starting pitchers who are having to cut down their ramp up process, like 6 to 8 weeks. So you give me better guidance than that. That's kind of what I'm going with.
George Springer was diagnosed with a grade 2 oblique strain on Tuesday. The Blue Jays are optimistic he'll be ready for opening day, but I am not sure.
That does not jibe with what we understand about oblique strains, which are like, it is incredibly rare that a player has an oblique strain and doesn't go on the IL. And so right there, you're talking about 8 days from opening day to now. Now, I think this injury happened a couple days ago, so maybe you could, but like, if it really is a grade 2 strain, that to me, again, this is just my interpretation based on what we've seen in the past, but that's the kind of thing that in my head, I think, well, that's a month at least. And oblique strains, anecdotally at least, oblique strains seem to have just about as many setbacks more setbacks than any other injury.
Here's the full line from Ross Atkins, the Blue Jays GM. His symptoms and all of his baseball movements and patterns are incredibly encouraging. We're extremely optimistic about his strength, about his range of motion, especially his rotational movements, that he could be playing baseball very soon. And it sounds like he was playing with tightness in the area, and then there was some inflammation. So that's when they sent him in for an MRI. No, I'm not really disagreeing with what you're saying. It's just adding a little context to it. Like it sounds like he's moving like a baseball player should for the most part.
And they're hoping he'll be ready for opening day. The quote actually was Springer is, quote, extremely motivated and driven to be ready by opening day, which is very different from the people running our medical staff expect him to be healthy and able to play on opening day. Every player is going to say, yeah, I'm going to be back for the next game. But that doesn't necessarily mean they will be. This is all still heavily conjecture, but just based on, I would be surprised if he doesn't miss at least some time. I'm not saying we need to move him down significantly, but a grade 2 oblique strain, it doesn't seem like the kind of thing you can be back from in 8 days.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem good. I remember Judge had this oblique a couple of years ago. He was out at least a month. He might have been out 2 months, and it is an injury that you could very easily re-aggravate. So, I mean, Scott, you gonna drop Springer in your rankings? Like
A little bit, yeah. A little bit.
Would you rather have him or Grisham right now, who is dealing with a hamstring injury himself?
I'd still rather have Springer.
Okay, so that means you're probably going to wind up dropping Springer like 5 or 6 spots in your outfield ranks. All right, so we'll see.
Maybe.
Find out. Go ahead.
Let me look at it right now and see.
Yeah, you have Springer at outfielder 11. You have Grisham at 17.
When this news broke, like I had just finished like a 2-hour update of my rankings, and it's like I got to move on to other things. So that's why they're not updated yet. But Springer dropping behind Tucker, Eloy Jimenez, Luis Robert for Roto, and that's about it. I'd still take Springer over Castellanos as much as I like Castellanos.
Alrighty, so you're probably getting maybe a round or 2 discount there on George Springer if you are optimistic. Let's stick with the Blue Jays. A bunch of stuff going on with the Blue Jays. Robbie Ray will miss one spring start after bruising his elbow while falling down some stairs. Baseball players find the most interesting ways to get hurt, or maybe it's just reported more in baseball than other sports. I don't know. It's just like they always get hurt. So odd. But Robbie Ray still hopes to be ready for the start of the regular season. Kirby Yates' elbow injury is serious enough to shut him down for the season and will probably lead to his second Tommy John surgery. I have moved Jordan Romano all the way up to RP14, but maybe not high enough because Scott has him inside of his top 12 relievers. Wow.
Yeah. Well, I say that because I feel like Romano's clearly the guy. What contradicts that is that the Blue Jays manager is not committing to a guy, but that's just kind of like the standard line for all managers now. And you got the pitching coach talking him up as a closer. Even before this injury happened to Kirby Yates, he was talking Romano up as a closer waiting to happen.
You don't need to name a closer is the thing. It's not like you have to draw up a lineup card that says Jordan Romano is in our closer spot.
Right.
And when that's the case in pretty much all sports, every coach is going to like, oh, well, we've got a lot of guys who we believe in, and we really trust anyone in that role. And, we're going to go with, the guy who's gives us the best chance to win. And it's like, okay, sure.
Yeah,
and then you're going to do that 2 days in a row with Jordan Romano, and then you're going to tell reporters that he's the closer. Like that's how this is going to work.
Yeah, maybe. I think it's a fairly recent phenomenon that they've kept it so close to the vest like that. But I think they just realized there's no upside to naming one, as opposed to just letting it reveal itself.
Yeah, I mean, you keep opposing teams off balance. They don't know who they're going to see in the 8th, 9th inning. It's kind of similar in football where, if a running back gets hurt, the coach is not going to just automatically say who the next man up is or something.
More than anything, I think it's media management because you're just inviting second guessing.
Yeah.
By putting terms to things.
Chris, can you just do an entire podcast in your manager voice? Because you were just like,
Yeah.
It's pretty.
Yeah. I mean, he's a really hard. He's a fierce competitor. He's got the makeup for it. But we've got a lot of trust in a lot of guys in the back end of the bullpen, and we really think any one of those guys can go out and give us a chance to win. So, we're just gonna take each game one at a time, and really, we're just trying to win games here.
You missed your calling, Chris. Alex Kirilloff has been optioned to the Twins' alternate training site. He was 4 for 31 with 8 strikeouts this spring. Is this a see you in 2 weeks type of situation, Scott?
I think he has to hit first. I think he could have won the left field job from the start if he had a good spring. But somebody in that position really has to force the issue because the financial incentives for sending them down 2 weeks are just too great that you can't blame any team when the player makes it that easy to send them down. You can't blame any team for doing that. But I think as soon as the Twins are satisfied that Kirilloff is on a roll and they can plug him in and he can hit the ground running, I think he'll be up.
Trent Grisham is, of course, dealing with a hamstring injury. He took part in a simulated game on Tuesday. He hasn't run at 100% yet, but still has a shot to be ready for opening day. And this isn't really news, but it is, I would say, noteworthy. Maybe it's noteworthy for some people. Get it out of your system now, Walker Buehler. He allowed 9 earned runs in his start on Tuesday against the Brewers, which included 10 hits. 4 of those were home runs. He did get his pitch count up to 80, so that was the positive there. But yeah, happy to see it now than in the regular season. Walker Buehler.
Now, I have Walker Buehler as a bust for this year, but it has nothing to do. This start does not influence my thinking on that in any way. It really isn't even a performance concern, period.
The fact that he's up to 80 pitches, that's usually what I expect from Walker Buehler in June.
Yeah. Right, he's more built up than usual this spring.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't throw 80 pitches until his 3rd start last season.
Yeah, it was just a really weird start to the year for everyone, but I mean,
and his 3rd start in 2019.
Yeah. All right. No, I mean, it's definitely noteworthy that he's getting that pitch count up. So good to see that from Buehler, but definitely not the 9 earned runs or 4 home runs. Let's get back into the bus 3.0 and jump back in with one of yours here, Chris. Well, let's just lump these together because I saw these. You sent them over to me, and you got to explain yourself a little bit. You have DJ LeMahieu and Matt Olson, both on your bus list. Explain yourself.
Well, I don't think Matt Olson really needs an explanation. He was a bust in 2020, so I think we can just move on. No, in both of these cases, it's just that I think you're paying a premium for production that you can get from other places. I have DJ LeMahieu as my number 1 second baseman, but I have him 1 spot ahead of Whit Merrifield. I have him 5 spots ahead of Ozzy Albies, and I have him 11 spots ahead of Ketel Marte. And I could actually, I think it's close to a coin flip on Ketel Marte and DJ LeMahieu. I think they're going to be very, very similar players. They have very, very similar skill sets. And so for me, it's more about not wanting to pay, a full round ahead of Ozzy Albies, a round and a half ahead of Whit Merrifield. The number 4 second baseman in ADP is actually Kevin Biggio, who's 3 rounds behind him, and then Brandon Lau. Ketel Marte is 50 picks after DJ LeMahieu, and so it just, to me, it's a simple, you're paying for a name and not necessarily the
Who's
production.
more likely to hit 330 than DJ LeMahieu? He seems like the single safest. You're calling DJ LeMahieu a bust?
Yeah. Again, it's not.
He does
it's
something
not,
no other player does. How are you saying he's going to get comparable production?
Ketel Marte hit 330 2 years ago, and he hit 287 in a down year. I don't expect DJ LeMahieu to hit 330.
Do you expect anybody, who do you think is most likely to lead the majors in batting average this year?
I expect someone to hit 330. I don't expect anybody to do it. If that makes sense.
Okay, who do you think is going to lead them? If you had to pick one player to lead the majors in batting average this year, who would it be? Because it would be LeMahieu for me.
Yes. I think he's the odds-on favorite, and not just...
that sounds right. Yeah, maybe Luis Arias because he's such a contact. But like, I think he's more likely to hit 300 than 330. DJ LeMahieu. Like you're drafting him. You're drafting him with the expectation he'll be a standout, not with he can do it. Like Ketel Marte can hit 330. DJ LeMahieu is being drafted as if he's going to do that kind of thing. He is, and I just don't think he is.
I would set the over under LeMahieu for 315 probably.
I would take the under.
Okay.
And Scott, you would take the.
I'm setting the over under, so I'm taking 315.
All right. I mean, yeah.
Isn't that how that works?
He's the odds maker. I think as a general rule of thumb for any type of fantasy sport, Chris, you're probably right that buying a player at his peak ADP coming off a career year is probably not the most profitable thing that you could do. So I get it from that perspective. It's just, his lineup context and everything that he's proven the past 2 years is just, it's hard to get away from it. But yeah, look,
plus he returned second round value in 2019. 2020 was even better. Yes.
Right. He's good. This is not a DJ LeMahieu's bad. It's not a Matt Olson is bad. No. It's I think they're being overvalued, and I think you can get similar production.
It's the same way that we felt about Pete Alonso last year. I still kind of feel that.
Yeah, but Pete Alonso was the second rounder last year. Matt Olson's like an 8th rounder this year.
Right. I think Matt Olson's being over. I still think Matt Olson.
I actually think Matt Olson is one of the most undervalued players in drafts right now. Because
I don't know how you can make that argument when Joey Gallo's going
Pete
50 picks later. Right, but Pete Alonso's better than Matt Olson.
I don't think I see them both as 250 hitters with 40 home runs. I think they're mirror images of each other. I think Joey Gallo might hit 210. Pete Alonso, he might be able to eke out a 240 batting average.
Pete Alonso is better than Matt Olson. He is not 35 picks better than Matt Olson, especially inside.
You guys really like Pete Alonso. This is the second day in a row we've argued about how good Pete Alonso actually is.
We've seen 59 games from Matt Olson where he was awesome in 2017. We saw 127 games where he was really good in 2019. Mm-hmm. We saw 162 games where he was in 2018, and we saw 60 really, really bad games from Matt Olson in 2020.
Small sample, and he hit 14 home runs in those 60 games. So
yeah, he's going to hit home runs. That's not a question. But
his batted ball data was better last year than it ever was.
Again, none of this is arguing that Matt Olson's not good. I'm arguing that he's being overdrafted. I'm arguing that there are similar players: Joey Gallo, Miguel Sano, Franmil Reyes. There are multiple other ones that you can.
Franmil Reyes, I think, is undervalued too, but he's obviously utility only, so that hurts.
Right, but being able to slot someone in at first base versus only utility, I don't think that has 60 picks of value.
Yeah, I would say the biggest difference why you think he's overvalued versus, I'm more likely to draft Matt Olson than you are, Chris, is because I guess you think his floor is that he can repeat a near 200 batting average. I don't think he's going to come anywhere close to that. I think,
that seems really fluky.
Well,
looking at the track record.
Even if it's not that, I think 2018, he was super disappointing, and nobody was drafting him.
It was his first full season in the majors.
He
did not deliver the power production we've seen from him every other year he's been. It was really he underachieved as a power hitter in that first full season.
The only 2 seasons where Matt Olson has not missed significant time, either in the minors or due to injury, he's been a disappointment. We're going off of 127 games in 2019 where he's an elite power hitter, and then 2017 59 games where he gets called up and was awesome.
But wouldn't you argue Alonso was a disappointment last year too, though? You're kind of giving Alonso the pass that you're not giving Matt Olson for the short season.
Alonso was a disappointment. He had an OPS 80 points higher than Matt Olson's.
80 points over a 60-game season is nothing.
Right, but he was also 50 points better in 2019, and he hit 53 home runs. I don't think there's if you want to argue Pete Alonso's overrated, that's fine. But this, Pete Alonso and Matt Olson aren't different. I can't get on board with that. I think that is just way off.
I think the data is very similar. Very similar.
we've got to move on from Matt Olson. Talked about him a lot. Scott, you have added Nolan Arenado to your bust 3.0. We talked about him recently. He hasn't looked great in the spring so far. He's batting 194, only one extra base hit, and he dealt with a left shoulder injury last year. And of course, he's not in Coors Field anymore. So I don't really think there's anything much more to add to that, unless you want to. We can move on to a different player. It's up to you.
Yeah, I think it's just too risky. I'd like to see the ADP drop more than it has. And, the fact he's still going around 30th on average is just... I would have been nervous to take him there even if he was still in Colorado because I don't know what's going on with his shoulder.
Mm-hmm. There are a few drafts where I've seen him fall outside the top 50, and if that's the case, then I will pounce on Nolan Arenado. I think I'm probably more likely to draft him than either of you based on that. Lance Lynn, Scott, you added to your bust 3.0, and there are some positives, there are some negatives here, but like what's the driving force here for
yeah, so it's a complicated one because there's certainly a point where I'll take Lance Lynn at his ADP just because I'm all about quantity over at starting pitcher, and you can't get that picky about it. You just kind of have to take what comes to you, and some of them are going to fail, but if you have enough of them, it'll be okay. I just think Lance Lynn is certainly not somebody I would draft enthusiastically or reach up for because the xFIP was over 430 last year. The strikeout rate was down. The swinging strike rate was down. A lot of what we liked about him in 2019 did not carry over to 2020. It looked like it did because, the ERA and everything was fine. But the underlying numbers were actually much more similar to 2018 when he had an ERA over 450, I want to say. So I could certainly see things going very wrong for him. I think people have gotten a little too sanguine. That's basically what it comes down to for me.
Yep, and the ADP for Lance Lynn right now, according to Fantasy Pros, is 52.2. So he's going right around that 4-5 turn if you play in a 12-team league. I haven't drafted any Lance Lynn yet either. The positives I see, he's going to be a workhorse, nice division of pitching. Yasmani Grandal is his catcher, which is all great. But of course, the xFIP was as high as it was because he allowed more fly balls than ever before. He had a career high fly ball rate last season at 42%, and now he's moving over to a more hitter-friendly ballpark in Chicago. So
yeah, the AL West is the most pitcher-friendly venue-wise.
Mm-hmm.
So leaving that is not a great thing for any fly ball pitcher.
Yeah, I thought I was going to be relatively high on Lance Lynn when I had him as SP17, but I don't think I've drafted him at all this season. I think I'm a little higher on him than you guys are. I do believe in the skill set and the fact that he's able to get strikeouts with his weird approach. I do think it makes him somewhat more likely to outperform his peripherals than your average pitcher, but I definitely haven't made him a priority this year. And maybe I need to move him down in the overall ranks because there's kind of a tier that drops off with him to Hyunjin Ryu, who I have a lot more of.
Yeah,
so.
I see him. I've referred to the Lance Lynn line before where I kind of see him between tiers. Everybody above Lance Lynn, I trust for volume and ratios. Everybody below Lance Lynn, I think either has a volume issue or a ratio issue.
Yeah.
And he's maybe he'll be both, but I have my doubts.
I don't know if this comparison is all that fair, but is Lance Lynn really that much different than Jose Barrios? I don't think so. And you're going to get Barrios 3 to 4 rounds later. So that's my last jab at Lance Lynn before.
Yeah. I think the last 2 seasons would probably be the best of Jose Barrios' career. If he had them, I think both would be a career high in strikeout rate.
You're saying Lance Lynn's last 2 seasons are better than Barrios' done. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, there's no arguing that. It's just a
Lance
fact.
Lynn's 33. He's about to turn 34 in May, so it's also possible he's on the downswing.
If you were watching on the video side, don't go anywhere. But when if you're listening to the podcast, then we're going to take a quick break, and when we return, Zach Plesac. Let's talk about him here, Fantasy Baseball Today. So everyone knows that Chris is a little bit more down on Plesac than Scott has been, and we've talked about it a ton. But I don't want to react too much to the spring. But he just hasn't been good. Zach Plesac has not been good in the spring so far. And normally I would say it doesn't matter for someone who's more established, but he's not. He's just not established. Like, we were drafting this guy inside the top 80 picks based on 8 starts from last year. And I have been guilty. I've ranked him inside my top 25 starters all off season long. 5 spring starts for Zach Plesac, 18 innings pitched, 23 hits allowed, 14 earned runs, 7 home runs allowed, 17 strikeouts is fine. That equals out to a 7.00 ERA and a 1.50 WHIP. So I don't think you need to dive all that deep into it, Chris. But this is kind of rough.
And 17 strikeouts actually isn't that great, because that's a 20.9% strikeout rate, which is what we're seeing here is the difference between K per 9 and strikeout rate in a small sample size, and why you should default to strikeout rate, because pitchers who give up a lot of hits and don't make a lot of outs will have a higher strikeout per 9 because they have more opportunities to get a strikeout per inning. But look, it's not about spring. This is a small sample size. It's a weird situation. You're not facing normal guys, all that stuff. But it's 40% of the total batters faced that he had in 2020. He had like 204 in 2020 and 81 so far in the spring. So you can't say it's nothing. And Zach Plesac is being drafted because of 2020. This is not something where like, oh, we saw some stuff in 2019 where we really liked him and then he built on it. It was like he was outside the top 400 going into 2020. He made those 8 great starts, and now he's inside the top 80. So any sample size that detracts from that 200 batter sample size from 2020, I think is worth looking at. It's not, I haven't moved him down, to be clear, in my rankings because of spring. I just don't have him very high. I have him like 120. Yeah, 120 overall, right behind Sandy Alcantara and Dinelson Lamet in my rankings.
And the ADP for Plesac is 76.6, so he's going much higher than that.
Yeah.
Scott, just a few words. Are you worried at all about this spring?
No, I mean, obviously, I'd rather his spring confirm what I already suspect. So, I mean, I think that's mostly what spring performance does. If there are no factors like, oh, his velocity's down. Oh, we're worried about this one pitch of his. Oh, we're just worried about him in general. You're not hearing any of that. In fact, you're hearing just the opposite. And I know he said after this start specifically, he was most focused on just making sure he was throwing every pitch in the strike zone. So it kind of, in spring training, pitchers who already have jobs, they're not trying to pitch well. They're just trying to get ready. And so that's why a lot of times you'll see really good pitchers have awful springs and then they turn it on as soon as the regular season starts. So, I don't really make much of anything of this. I obviously don't know what's going to happen with Zach Plesac. I don't know. That's if he was one of only 3 high-end pitchers I drafted, or potentially high-end 3 pitchers, I would be nervous, but I would have been before spring training started too. If he's one of 5, then, whatever. Let's just see how it goes. I think he could be good still.
Let's stick with the starting pitchers. Sonny Gray is in your bust 3.0, Scott, and he was a weird pitcher to evaluate even before he's dealing with this mid-back strain last year. I mean, the walks have always been an issue for Sonny Gray, but last year they were up over 4 walks per 9 for him, and his swinging strike rate just doesn't really add up to the strikeouts that he gets. And, of course, again, he's dealing with a mid-back strain, suffered that same injury last year. So, I mean, Scott, of course there's a point where he would fall where you would be willing to draft him, but, if he's going anywhere close to where he was before, I mean, you're just out.
Yeah. I mean, the back issues dating back to last year. And basically he was amazing at the start of last season, missing a ton of bats, looked like he was the Cy Young front runner. And then his effectiveness dropped off before he even missed time with the injury. And then when he came back, it still wasn't quite like he was missing bats before. So the fact he's still dealing with that same mid back area now a whole off season later, that just tells me he's going to have trouble regaining that effectiveness we saw at the end of 2019 and the very beginning of 2020. And so kind of like a mid-range outcome is all I'm really hoping for from Sonny Gray. And there's a chance it could go wrong from there.
Mm-hmm. You've dropped Sonny Gray in your ranks down to SP 36. I have him at SP 32. and Chris has him at SP37. And I think originally he was inside each of our top 30s, maybe even inside the top 25 for each of us. So given this back injury, we have been dropping Sonny Gray down the ranks. Chris, you've added Dominic Smith to your bus, and his Fantasy Pros ADP is 118. But I will point out that he's dropping in the NFBC ADP the last 2 weeks. That's down to 131. So 13 picks with a max pick. One draft, he slipped all the way to pick 203. So I understand. I mean, there's stuff going on with Dom Smith, the risk, playing time. But I mean, if he's starting to fall, are you still considering him a bust if he's 130 or 140 ADP? You're muted.
No, not if he's falling to that range.
Yeah.
If he goes 140, I think it's a lot easier to stomach what I think are the risks there, which, it's not just like the wrist. It seems fine. I think he was back in the lineup today. It's not just the defense, although he might be the worst defensive outfielder in baseball. I think of the 4 guys who have a worse UZR 150 over the last 2 seasons, JD Martinez is one of them, and I think the other 3 might not be on a team right now. So, I just think it's a combination of several things where, he basically has 200 plate appearances in each of the last 2 seasons where he's been this really, really good hitter. That's a really small sample size. If a guy had 400 really good plate appearances in one season, I think we would treat that with a certain level of skepticism, especially if he had, a track record of not performing well. The fact that it happened over 2 seasons, I think we're like, well, there was an off season in between it and he did it for 2 seasons, but I don't think that necessarily changes the statistical, arguments against, how long it takes skill sets to, become stable, how long it takes for, various stats to stabilize, all that stuff. So I just think it a 9th round pick is it's a little too much for me to pay for a guy who I have those questions about. If he was playing 4 times a week by the 3rd week of the season, it wouldn't shock me.
Yeah, I see what you're saying too. It's tough because I actually really like the player. I think, everything we've seen in the past 2 years, I'm buying in. He had prospect pedigree. He's still pretty young. He's younger than Pete Alonso. I've mentioned that before. And the StatCast numbers back up.
Youngest player in their lineup.
Yeah, the StatCast numbers back up what Dom Smith did last year. He makes really hard contact. He hits well against lefties. It's just a matter of him, playing adequate enough defense, which that's not even the word. He's not going to be adequate. He's going to be below average in the outfield, but just enough for them to stomach that. His bat needs to be that much better. So we'll see what happens with the playing time. I get the risk, but
2019, the underlying batted ball numbers were not particularly strong. So, he really only has the 200 plate appearance season in 2020 where everything looked good. So, it's just, I think there are questions.
Yeah. You painted the downside. I do think the upside for Dom Smith, though, is that, we're drafting him inside the top 50 picks next year. If he hit 300 with 30 home runs, it really would not surprise me. So, see what happens with Dom Smith. Scott, Kenley Jansen is on your bus 3.0, but I feel like we've talked about him. He lost his job in the postseason, past 2 seasons, so he's getting older. You feel like it's going to happen?
Yeah, all my busts are just yada, 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 right? That's all you hear.
No.
No, that's basically it.
I don't want to spend too much time on guys that we've talked
about. I got you.
Anyway, so, Marcus Semien, I haven't seen this name on your list before. Why are you worried about him?
Well, I'm just surprised nobody else seems to be. He's not being drafted that much lower than he was last year when he was coming off a near MVP season. And to me, I was pretty high on him coming off that season. I thought, okay, some of these underlying numbers, I could see how he made some changes. This looks like he might be able to sustain it, Semien. But 2020 just made it crystal clear to me. One of these things is not like the others, looking over his whole career. He's a low 700s OPS guy. Didn't even quite get there last year. But that's consistently what he's been. I think people are really banking on him leaving Oakland, going to a smaller park, actually in Dunedin, Florida, to start out, but still a smaller park than Oakland. Still a good hitter's park, we think. And thinking that's going to transform him. It's possible, but I mean, he always hit about the same at home as he did on the road. Like the splits are pretty even. I don't look at the numbers and say, okay, this guy was held back by his park. I think I'm anticipating like a 250 batting average, 15 to 20 homers, maybe 10 steals from Marcus Semien, which I don't think that merits the price tag. I mean, we were doing a draft today. He went ahead of Javier Baez, and I'm like, what are you doing?
In a points league, I can see that just because of the walk rate.
Yeah,
he does walk a decent amount.
You're clearly counting on a much, like, none of us really have any doubts Baez is going to bounce back, right? I mean, not really.
And then
you're counting on Marcus Semien being more than pre-2019 Marcus Semien if you're taking him ahead of Baez, regardless of the format.
Yeah, I would think there are probably two arguments, and I'm not saying these are reasons to draft. I would take Javier Baez ahead of him. Baez probably is going to bat sixth for the Cubs as well. I think he's batted sixth pretty much exclusively in the spring when they've had something like their normal lineup. And so, we do think Semien's going to be in a better lineup. He's going to bat second in that lineup, most likely, potentially lead off if Springer's injury lingers. And so in a points league, you could be talking about the difference between a number 2 hitter and a number 6 hitter being like a half a plate appearance per game. So I could see that mattering, but no, I don't have Semien ahead of Javier Baez. I'll just say I think he probably hits like 255. I think he's probably between 15 and 20 homers. I think he's probably between 10 and 15 steals.
Yeah, you could get those kind of stats so much later than he's going.
I agree.
Right?
I think a lot of it's just like he could score a ton of runs at the top of that lineup. Like if he's a 340 on base percentage guy and bats second in that lineup, he could,
But if he's only a 340 on base percentage guy, if he's hitting 250, does he bat second all year? Because they got other candidates for that spot.
He's a career 322 OBP, so
right. But he's had a spike in walk rate the last couple of seasons. That does seem.
But even with that, I mean, it was 305 last year, 369 in the breakout season, 318, 325. I mean, I'm closer with you, Scott. It's just his OPS every season since he's become a full-time player in 2015, 715, 735, 722, 706, 892, 679. And of course, the 892 came in 2019 with the famous juice ball. So
to a certain extent, I think there's some just. It's an artifact of what's happening to anybody who could steal 10 bases and hit, 15 homers.
Yeah.
I get it. I don't have him as a bust. I don't think I've drafted him more than a couple times, but I get it both ways.
Bust 3.0 in the books. You can find all of our writing about those busts on the website, cbssports.com/fantasy/baseball. I was looking into some of these UTIL only bats just because some people have been asking, when we expect them to gain position eligibility, if they are going to gain any type of position eligibility. And I will say much more optimistic about JD Martinez and Jorge Soler. I'll point out Soler on a few of the other sites already has outfield eligibility, but on CBS, you need 10 games played from a position last year to have that eligibility, and Jorge Soler did not get there. So on CBS, he is UTIL only for now. JD Martinez has started 7 of 15 games in the outfield this spring, and even if the Red Sox only played him in the outfield for National League road games, they play their 5th road game by May 23rd. But I would guess, based on how they're using him, that he probably has outfield eligibility by late April. That's JD Martinez. Jorge Soler has started 9 of 16 games in the outfield this spring. And I would say that their best lineup very clearly has Jorge Soler playing in right field with Whit Merrifield at second. I don't know if they're going to do that every single day, but even if they did it once or twice a week, Soler is another one that could have outfield eligibility by the end of April. Yordan Alvarez and Giancarlo Stanton, completely different story. Alvarez has started all 6 of his games this spring at DH, and Houston does not play their 5th National League road game until August 1st. And that is also assuming that he plays the field in all 5 of those games. So I I can't guarantee you that. I don't even know where he would play. Would he play first base? Would he play outfield?
So that's the thing, is
no
that
idea.
he has two avenues to getting in the lineup. And they have talked about having him play a little bit. I'm looking at an article from a couple weeks ago. It sounds like they do want to, it's from The Athletic, they do want to get him some reps at first base before spring is over. I don't know if that's going to come in a game, but the thing is, as we learned with Anthony Rizzo a couple of years, you don't actually have to play a position for even a full inning to get a appearance there. If you make one appearance, if you play one play, and it's an out, I guess, or a hit, or a walk, that counts as an appearance at that position. And so, maybe you have a couple of times early on in the season where Yordan Alvarez, someone gets hurt, they need to get someone out. They put him in left field when he's on an off day or something for like the last 2 innings, or he makes a pinch hit appearance late in a game where he's not playing, and then plays first base because they've got a fly ball pitcher in or something like it's with him versus Stanton. I think because first base and left field are an option, it's probably more likely that he gets some kind of additional eligibility, but in neither case does it seem particularly likely to happen quickly.
I will point out that with Stanton, he's told Aaron Boone he doesn't need to play any outfield this spring. He'll be ready to go whenever they need to put him out there. It's not worth taking the risk in spring training. So I don't know that I necessarily read anything into the fact he hasn't played in the outfield this spring, just based on that.
And
it'll only take 5 appearances, so I expect Stanton will get it at some point.
Yeah. And given, I know Giancarlo Stanton is historically injury prone, but you look around the other guys they have in the outfield: Clint Frazier, Aaron Hicks, Aaron Judge,
There's
Brett Gardner.
There's a lot of injury risk out there.
There could be a lot of, if Giancarlo Stanton happens to be healthy at the point when 2 of the other guys get hurt for a couple of days, which is likely to happen at some point this season, he could be out there. Although I guess Mike Tauchman may still make the team. It's not clear.
I would rank the likeliness of these UTIL only players to gain outfield eligibility in the order of JD Martinez, Soler, then probably Stanton, and then Yordan Alvarez, and then and that's with like how quick I think that they're going to gain it as well. Let's just wrap up with some deeper sleepers. Scott, you wrote an article recently about 30 deep sleepers, and I think this is relevant for anyone who plays, obviously in just deeper mixed leagues, but also for anyone who plays in AL only and NL only. We don't typically talk about them all that much because, frankly, there's not a lot of people that play AL and NL only anymore. So we'll just kind of go rapid fire here, and anyone that you want to talk about, Chris, if you want to jump in, if there's a name that we say that excites you, we will just run through some of the catchers here. Alejandro Kirk, Tom Murphy, Francisco Mejia, Dom Nunez.
Yeah, Mejia and Nunez are the ones I find myself drafting the most, basically in those 2 catcher 15 team leagues where I'm waiting until my last 2 picks to fill catcher. I mean, Mejia was for a long time the top catching prospect in baseball. Never really got an extended look in either Cleveland or San Diego. The Rays seem more likely to play him consistently because Mike Zunino is terrible. And Dom Nunez, 17 homers in 213 at-bats with a 921 OPS his last year in the minors, 2009. He bats left-handed. He's supposed to be backing up Elias Diaz to start the year, but considering he bats left-handed, like I could see him claiming the larger portion of the share of that, and then, obviously Coors Field's at his disposal.
Alejandro Kirk is someone that I've been drafting a lot as my second closer, and so far in the spring, he's as my second catcher. Excuse me. He is 7 for 22 in the spring with 2 home runs, awesome batting average in the minors. I would expect him to hit for batting average if he plays, but of course, Danny Jansen is still on the team, so I think it's one of those pay attention early on in the season to see what that split is. But if Kirk is out playing him, I think we could see him take over that role pretty soon.
Kirk in the ATC projections is actually projected to be the 6th best hitter at catcher by WOBA. Obviously, that's, the playing time is the big thing. He's only projected for 64 games, but that has him right above Travis d'Arnaud.
He's a really good hitter. Tons of contact and some power too.
I'm excited about Alejandro Kirk. At first base, Joey Votto, who we really have not talked about much, and then Bobby Bradley, who is kind of in a first base battle with Jake Bauers for the Cleveland Indians, and he's looked really good. He lost a ton of weight in the offseason, so Votto and Bradley.
Yeah, he's always had huge power in the minors. I think 7 of his 9 hits have gone for extra bases this spring. Strikes out a lot, at least he did in the past. And you know, Bauers probably gets the job because he's out of options, but it may not take long for Bradley to be up. Votto, I'm actually starting to get really excited about. He hasn't played much this spring because he's just coming back from COVID, and maybe that slows him down to begin the year. But just the changes he's made to his approach, went on a tear at the final 29 games last year, 8 home runs, 941 OPS. And he said he went back to doing what he did when he first came up, which was, you know, not choking up on the bat, really swinging for the fences more instead of selling out for contact and controlling the strike zone. Like he's decided he's willing to strike out more to hit more home runs, and he seemed to put it into practice last September.
Yep.
At second base, Ty France, Brendan Rodgers, and Josh Rojas. We just spoke about Rojas yesterday on our Sleepers and Breakouts 3.0, as well as Ty France, who we've been talking about a ton because he's just been crushing it in the spring. Brendan Rodgers does have a hamstring injury, and there's talks of him missing potentially the first month of the season. But once he's healthy, he should have an opportunity to play every day for the Rockies. Hopefully.
Yeah, unless somebody takes the job and runs with it in his absence. Like that was the plan. He's finally it's rare the Rockies are as clear about their intentions for their young players as they were with Rodgers this year. And you know, elite prospect. Last time he was ranked as a prospect with power, speed, and Coors Field. He's somebody I'm going to have stashed away for when he comes back in a lot of leagues.
He could hit 320.
Yeah,
Coors Field. I mean,
That's
that's a positive. When your park's giving you a 360 BABIP, that opens the door to a lot of possibilities for your batting average. Yeah,
and especially for people who play in leagues with a lot of IL spots, 5 IL spots, unlimited IL. Tout Wars the other day, I had unlimited IL spots. I drafted Brendan Rodgers and I drafted Framber Valdez, and I'm just going to throw these guys on IL, and when they return, hopefully they do something. It's, you know, high upside plays there, going very late in your drafts. Let's lump third base and shortstop together here. Jonathan India, prospect for the Cincinnati Reds, rather, and Nico Horner, who is expected to be the starting second baseman for the Chicago Cubs.
Heading into today, he had only struck out once at 28 at bats. Horner had. He changed his setup at the plate to hopefully unlock more power. I know some analyst types have been talking about how he never really showed power the little bit he played in the minors, but they saw the potential for power in him. He's also very fast and has attempted 3 steals this spring. So I think he could surprise. I think he could be. I think there's similar upside for Horner to like Nick Solak. And India I like a lot too. If he wins the second base job, you know, he's listed at third base right now, but if he wins the second base job, good on base skills, emerging power, showed more at the alternate training site last year, former 5th overall pick. I think there's upside there for sure.
Yeah, the power is definitely the question there. He only hit 11 home runs in 2019, but he was dealing with the wrist injury for most of that season. And so, you know, I think it's fair to wonder whether, you know, he can be better than his minor league track record. But even if he's not,
it's not much of a record either. It was very
right. Yeah,
to a short season and a full season, basically.
Yeah. But even then, like, he's shown 12 homer, 15 steal potential, which if you can combine that with decent on base percentages and a decent batting average, that can have value.
Yep. And even if he's batting near the bottom of the Reds lineup, it's a decent lineup and it's a really good ballpark to hit in. So I saw the Reds lineup on Tuesday, included him playing second base and Eugenio Suarez back at short and Mike Moustakas at third base. So that seems to be what they're going for, and they're sticking with it for now. In the outfield, you wrote up Justin Upton, Miles Straw, Hunter Renfroe, Sam Hilliard, Tyler O'Neill, Taylor Trammell, and Michael Taylor. Who are you? Give me one name here, Scott, the one you're most excited about.
Most excited. Well, I feel like the one we're not talking about enough is Michael Taylor, who is the Royals center fielder. There are no playing time concerns there. injuries and strikeouts really held him back in Washington, but I think it was in 2017, a 19 homer, 17 steal season with less than full-time at bats. And he's changed his stance. He used to have a big leg kick. It's now kind of just shifting his weight, and they think it's going to allow him to make a lot more contact. He's had an awesome spring. Power and speed there, playing time. I mean, he's like a last round pick in 15-team 5 outfielder leagues, and I think he deserves better than that.
I could see him being like Kevin Biggio with worse runs and RBI numbers just because of the lineup, but like, you know, his projection from ATC, it's 9 homers, 7 steals, but it's only 313 plate appearances. If you give him 600 plate appearances, that gets him to like 18 homers, 14 to 15 steals.
Right.
That's entirely reasonable.
Yeah, and you know, if there is skills improvement with him making his stance more composed, I don't know. I do want to mention Justin Upton too, because we never talk about him. He's probably going to bat behind Rendon and Trout, so like an amazing RBI position. And he had an awesome September too. Final 22 games last year, 303 with 6 home runs. You know, he was bad in 2019 too, but he was dealing with a couple injuries.
Yeah, he was
like he has a long
2019.
He has a long track record of being a middle of the order thumper, and I think maybe he's being written off too soon here.
Amazingly, also only 33 years old.
Yeah,
just feels like he should be 37.
He's been around for, well, I think he debuted early, right?
He was 19 when he made his debut.
Yeah, so he was super young. At starting pitcher, Robbie Ray, we talked about recently. Mackenzie Gore, prospect for the San Diego Padres. That is Luis Severino with the Yankees, Drew Smyly, Griffin Canning, Tarek Skubal, Yusei Kikuchi, Spencer Howard, Trevor Rogers, and Carlos Rodon. We've talked about a lot of these names recently. Who haven't we talked about?
I love those last 4 names. That is
Kikuchi, Howard,
all my
Rogers,
stuff.
and
Yeah,
Rodon.
love all those guys.
Well, let me throw these guys in the mix because we haven't talked about these names. Dalton Jeffries, who has been awesome in the spring for the A's, and he might have just locked up their 5th starter job. I know AJ Puck was competing for it, but 13 innings pitched, 2 earned runs, 20 strikeouts. Again, the name there, Dalton Jeffries. Randy Dobnak, the stash man. Talked about him last year. We were streaming him for a little bit. 8 2/3, 13 strikeouts this spring. He has a new slider he's been pitching with. Logan Webb with the San Francisco Giants. A lot like Dalton Jeffries, he might have locked up the 5th starter job for the San Francisco Giants. 17 strikeouts over 11 shutout innings pitched for the Giants so far. And Jake Arrieta, who is old and not very exciting, but if you are into streaming and if he is inside the top 3 starters in the rotation for the Cubs, he will face the Pittsburgh Pirates in his first 2 starts. So Jeffries, Dobnak, Webb, and Arrieta.
Yeah, my favorite there are Jeffries and Webb because I think they have the most upside. Dalton Jeffries, he pitched in 2019 in the minors. He pitched 79 innings, 93 strikeouts to 9 walks, which is like the kind of stuff Shane Bieber was doing in the minors. I know, let's not compare him to Shane Bieber, but nonetheless, it's rare you see that kind of strikeout to walk rate from anybody in the minors.
At relief pitcher, TJ Antone, of course, just get healthy, man. He has been throwing recently for the Cincinnati Reds and still competing for a spot in their rotation. And Freddie Peralta, the optimism is growing in the industry, expected to make a start for the Milwaukee Brewers on Friday. I guess there's still a chance that he could work his way into the rotation as well. Let's wrap there. For Scott and Chris, I am Frank. Thank you all for listening and watching Fantasy Baseball today. We'll be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.